Welcome back to the 73rd online episode of Peacetime, hosted every Sunday morning by Peace Point with myself, Phra Nicholas Thanissaro, live streaming from DIMC in Azusa, California. Last time you saw me, we looked at blessing number 31 on the practice of austerities. With the Dhamma talk today, we'll continue on our journey through the 38 blessings to the second blessing in the practice for the eradication of defilements subsection. That is number 32 on practicing the Brahma-Faring. This blessing concerns attaining high levels of mind and renouncing sensual sources of happiness. So today's session will run to about an hour and 10 minutes, starting with a 20-minute talk on higher states of mind, sensuality, and how to relinquish it, then 30 minutes of meditation and 20 minutes on reaching towards liberation. As far back as blessing number 6, we learned about distinct levels of aim in life. In fact, earlier blessings served us well for mundane levels of ambition in life, but this blessing, as we reach towards more transcendental aims, is one where we need to depthen our understanding of spiritual practice. At the time of studying the 6th blessing, several complex facets of mental attainment were left unexplained. But now, as we near the end of the 38 blessings, with striving towards liberation, it becomes necessary to give a more thorough explanation of concepts including the Buddhist psychology of transcendental states of mind. In blessing 31, we studied about austerities as a way of burning up defilements in the mind. However, once you have burned up your defilements, you cannot afford to rest on your laurels. It's like farmers who have weeded their fields. As soon as the weeds are gone and all that's left is the fertile fields, if they are slow to sow their crops, the weeds will grow back worse than before, and all their efforts will have been in vain. With the removal of defilements from the mind, it's the same principle. Having practiced the austerities, as soon as you find that your mind starts to become detached from sensual indulgence and reluctance, which are the opposites of sense restraint and striving that we saw in the previous blessing, you need to be quick to upgrade your mind towards transcendental attainments. If you delay, your old bad habits may come back worse than before. Unfortunately, even if our level of attainment were accidentally to reach the transcendental level, if our way of life were not sufficiently pure, the transcendental attainments would not be sustainable. Some people misunderstand that Buddhists are atheists and reject the existence of any form of supernatural beings. In fact, although Buddhists believe that such beings did not have a role in creating the world, nor any influence in a practitioner's salvation, they recognize the existence of divine beings on various levels that fill the realms of Buddhist cosmology. Such beings are understood to have all the qualities that exemplify high and subtle states of mind, such as loving-kindness and compassion. These godlike beings in the Dharmic religions, such as Buddhism, are known as Brahma. They are more subtle still than the angel-like beings known as Devas or Devata. The Pali word used to refer to this blessing is Brahmacharya, a word that is sometimes translated as Brahma-Faring or holy life, or sometimes more narrowly as purity, celibacy, or sexual abstinence. In the sense of practice, it means elevating yourself to the level of the divine, a sort of mental apotheosis. And what sort of lofty thoughts might a divine being have? Unlike the Greek gods, who are still caught up in desires, a divine being in the Buddhist sense has transcended gender distinctions and interest in sensual matters, to the point that no such defilements remain in their minds. The rationale of this blessing is therefore to elevate not just our state of mind, but also our comportment to the level of the Brahma-Faring, in preparation for our ultimate liberation. Default level of mind for someone who never meditated before would be muddled by unending thoughts and distractions. However, as they start to focus inwardly through meditation, they will move their mind through the preparatory and neighborhood levels of concentration, moving from left to right on the diagram, until overcoming the 5 hindrances and entering upon the first of the absorptions. The quality of mind is dependent on the degree to which the mind is unified, purified, or made free of thought. If the meditator can overcome the 5 hindrances that we met in Blessing 19, the mind can become unified at the level of the first absorption, or jhana, a mental state which is qualitatively different from anything previously experienced. Further cultivation of the mind will lead to the second, third, and fourth absorptions. According to Buddhism, all the states of mind mentioned so far are considered no better than mundane. However, anyone who cultivates their mind beyond the absorptions can elevate the mind to a condition so pure that it is transcendental. As for the differences between the absorptions and the terms mundane and transcendental, what we need to do before we go any further is to understand what we are talking about, at least in broad brushstrokes, and we'll do this by breaking the sequence of levels of mind down into 4 subcategories that derive happiness from different sources. The 3 planes of mental states, or as they are referred to in Pali language, Tribhumi, include the sensual, form, and formless levels. To these 3, I'm going to add a 4th that goes beyond the 3 planes, known as the transcendental level. And while I'm at it, I'll warn you in advance that for each level I'm going to cross-reference with the inner bodies of the Dhamma tradition that we saw back in B046, as we try to flesh out the descriptions of states of mind in terms of meditation experience. The first level is the sensual plane of mind, or Kamma Vajara Bhumi, not to be confused with the 1976 movie by Nagisa Oshima. This is the plane where the mind is still attached to the temptation of sensual pleasures. It's a frame of mind entrapping both those who never meditated before and those who are new to meditation. The mind at this stage is like a puppet dancing on the strings pulled by the 5 hindrances. States of mind typical of the sensual plane would be anything pertaining to the physical body. As a result of meditation, while still on the sensual plane, the mind will transition through the diamond-like sphere of the initial path, or Patamamaka, which marks the beginning of the first absorption in its precursory form, until it reaches the first absorption proper, with all 5 scripturally endorsed jhana factors. At this stage, the Dhammakaya tradition adds the detail of seeing the subtle human body or astral body, a transparent miniature of oneself in meditation posture, sitting within one's center. The defilements associated with the mental states at this level comprise covetousness, vengefulness, and false view. Still within the sensual plane, when the mind is sufficiently pure to be released from the 3 defilements connected with the subtle human body, it will move through to the angelic body, which is an inner body similar to the subtle human body but more refined. The defilements to be dealt with on this level are greed, hatred, and delusion. This level is equivalent to the second absorption. When the mind is sufficiently pure to be released from the latest 3 defilements mentioned, the mind will escape the sensual plane and reach the form plane, or Rupa Vajara Bhumi. This is the plane of those whose mind is released from the grasp of sensuality, but who are still attached to the happiness of the absorptions on the form plane. The actual experience for a meditator on this level is that whether their eyes are open or closed, they will perceive a bright sphere at the center of their body the whole of the time, as clearly seen as with the eye, and they will have no remaining interest in the sense pleasures. Sense temptation will hold no more attraction for them than kiddie games. The experience inside for the meditator, as explained in the Dhammakaya tradition, is the attainment of the form Brahma body, which is similar to the angelic body but more subtle still. This is equivalent to the third absorption. The defilements associated with this plane of mind are grasping, hatred, and delusion. Some of these defilements may sound the same as those on the lower levels, but they have specific qualities for each plane of mind. When the mind is sufficiently pure to be released from the latest 3 defilements, the mind escapes from the form plane and can attain the formless. The formless plane of mind, which in the Pali language is known as the Arupa Vajara Bhumi, is where the mind is released from attachment both to the sense pleasures and that of the form absorptions. However, it is still attached to the absorptions at the formless level. The word formless doesn't mean without form, but refers to reality on this plane being of an order of magnitude more subtle than on the form plane. A meditator with such a level of attainment will have intense brightness inside them the whole of the time, and it will be no problem for them to sit for meditation uninterrupted for 7 days and 7 nights without a break. According to the Dhammakaya tradition, a meditator who reaches this level will be able to perceive the formless Brahma body inside them the whole of the time. The inner body is similar to the form Brahma body, but more subtle still. It is equivalent to the fourth absorption. The defilements associated with the formless Brahma body are the anusaya, comprising subtle desire, irritation, and subtle ignorance. At this point, there will be hardly any need for the meditator to sleep anymore. Only 15 or 20 minutes per day will be sufficient. The brightness inside keeps the mind refreshed the whole of the time. All 3 levels I've mentioned so far are considered to be mundane states of mind, or lokiya pumi, because they have not entirely broken free from the touch of worldly suffering. When the mind is sufficiently pure to be released from the 3 defilements connected with the formless plane, in effect from the whole of the 3-plane system, it will attain a radically different level known as the transcendental plane of the mind, or lokutara pumi. In contrast to what has gone before, this is a plane of mind beyond the touch of the ups and downs of the worldly life that cause suffering. At this level, the mind is still at a standstill, always resplendent in brightness, and able to see the world as it really is. According to the Dhammakaya tradition, entry-level experience of the transcendental level is marked by attainment of the transitional Dhamma body, known as Dhammakaya Hotrapu. This is a crystal-clear body of enlightenment like a Buddha statue inside oneself. The first body of enlightenment stands at the cusp between the mundane or lokiya and the transcendental or lokutara worlds. Beyond the first body of enlightenment, there are successive levels of Dhamma body, corresponding with the paths and fruits of nirvana, and finishing up with the arahant fruit for a meditator who has come to a complete end of defilements. For all except the arahant, there are still some residual subtle defilements in the mind known as fetters or samyojana, which are gradually uprooted according to the process that we will return to in the next blessing. Sometimes we think of enlightenment in terms of the personage of the Buddha, but actually it all comes down to the state of mind attained. From the time of his birth as Prince Siddhartha to the time when he renounced the palace to start his ascetic practices, he was trapped in the sensual plane of mind, with his luxuries, entourage of consorts, and different palaces for every season. At age 7, Prince Siddhartha had a glimpse of the first absorption when he meditated under the black plum tree, when he was able to elevate his mind temporarily to the form plane. Later on, when he studied with Alara Galama and Uddaka Ramaputta, he could further raise the level of his mind to the formless plane. At the age of 35, when he attained enlightenment, his mind entered upon the transcendental level. He attained all of these planes without once leaving the human realm or his human body. His mind was elevated, but not his body. Perhaps at this point I should recap that there is a symmetry in Buddhism between states of mind which are transitory within any given life and realms of existence which we inhabit throughout any given life. In Buddhism, states of mind are called planes or pumi, and realms of existence are called spheres or phava. To give an example of the equivalence, if a person were meditating and achieved a high state of mind, but suddenly passed away at that moment, then since the mind is tuned in to a subtle wavelength, according to the principle of like attracts like, the spirit would leave the body and be attracted more permanently to that highly subtle realm of existence where that state of mind is the norm. It's like an exam performance becoming a qualification, a fleeting moment being captured as a photo, or a prehistoric insect captured in amber. An important but temporary state becomes a person's destiny. We therefore find that states of mind and realms of existence are all paralleled. To cut a long story short, for our purposes today, the Brahma-Faring refers not only to the plane of mind of a Brahma, but also their attitudes and comportment too in the realm of existence. If you're interested in how we get imprisoned in the realms equivalent to the 3 planes of mind, I advise you to look back at the elaboration that we saw in my B062 presentation on the 31 realms of existence of the 3 piggyback spheres that you can see in this slide. But coming back to the planes of mind, I mentioned earlier that they can be distinguished by the way happiness is sourced. On the higher planes, happiness comes from a whole different place. Starting at the bottom, at the level of happiness of the sensual plane, the happiness sourced from having a family and indulging in sense pleasure has been compared to the happiness of a young child playing in the mud. The next step up, which is the happiness of the form plane, which is the happiness sourced from attaining the form absorptions, is compared to the satisfaction of someone who achieves some sort of a success in their life. The next step up is the happiness of the formless plane, in other words, the happiness sourced from the attainment of the formless absorptions, which is compared to the satisfaction of being glad for others. Lastly, we come to the happiness of the transcendental level, the happiness of breaking free from all defilements, which is said to be happiness beyond comparison, because it is beyond the touch of the worldly vicissitudes that we shall see in Blessing 35. The reason for this quantitative difference in the level of happiness is the radically reduced number of defilements in the mind. If we can permanently raise our mind to the highest level, then it becomes possible to gain entry to a purer existence, or better still, not to be reborn anymore. To move from where we are now, in other words, the sensual realm and the mundane world, to where we want to be on the transcendental level, we have to cast off the temptations of sensuality and the temptations of satisfaction with the form and formless absorptions. You have to sever the attachments sequentially. This point is difficult to understand, which is not surprising because it's been widely misunderstood even amongst the monks. You're not supposed to give up everything all at once. According to the Majjhima Nikaya's Rattavinita Sutta, the process is a relay. It's rather like opiate users swapping methadone on their way to recovery, rather than going cold turkey. For the mind, it's the same. In order for the mind to escape a lower level, we need to build up a higher state of mind ready and waiting to receive the outgoing mind. If you plan to remove sensual interest from the mind and you just try to sever the ties without anything by way of replacement, you will always relapse. The mind needs something qualitatively superior to replace the object of its attention. If you have no new, better object of interest as a replacement, then the mind will eventually fall back. This is why you have to train yourself in meditation to the degree that you attain the first absorptions of the mind, the brightness within, before you can hope to sever the ties of sensual temptation. Your mind has to be completely absorbed in the happiness of meditation attainment before it will be able to give up the happiness derived from sensual indulgence. If you're dreaming of settling down with a cute husband or wife, and someone were to come along and claim it would be great for you to deny yourself all sensual pleasure, you would assume that you're speaking to a crazy person. If you really want to give up your sweet dreams of sensual fulfillment, you need to meditate until brightness arises within, offering you an alternative form of fulfillment. Without such an alternative, you will never be able to force people to relinquish sensuality. Anyone who does try to give up sensual attachment without doing meditation is otherwise doomed to failure. Given the amount of time and effort we invest in the performing arts, most people would balk at the idea that the senses are somehow insidious. Nonetheless, the Buddha was clear in blaming both sense pleasure and the objects of sense pleasure for ensnaring living beings in a world of suffering. He said that sense pleasure never satiates our appetite, therefore he compared it to chewing on a dry bone. He claimed it gives diminishing returns as we age, so he compared it both to borrowed jewelry and carrying a burning torch into the wind. He warned that with sensuality, if we get too close, we will get burned, comparing it to a pool of burning oil and a razor's edge. As for the objects of our romantic interest, he claimed that they can never truly belong to us, comparing them to meat fought over by vultures or a fruit tree in the forest. The pleasures anticipated from our romantic interest also come with conditions and responsibilities, so he compared them to a dream that will disappear as soon as we wake up. Lastly, he warned that our romantic interest is plagued with clinginess and suspicion, so he compared it to a stake hammer and a snake's head. In fact, these are merely a small selection of the many metaphors the Buddha gave for sensuality. Before we have meditation today, there is time for a quick story, which illustrates the way in which states of mind, afterlife destination, and liberation are continuations of each other. Many aeons ago, the teaching of a previous Buddha had almost disappeared from the world. There were 7 monks who were still dedicated to practice. They realized society had degraded to a level where no one was interested to learn about Dhamma anymore, so all 7 decided to withdraw to the forest to practice in earnest instead of wasting their time with society anymore. They found a mountain in the forest which was surrounded by cliffs on all sides. That would be an ideal place for their meditation. They agreed between themselves all to meditate on top of the mountain in a final bid for enlightenment. They climbed a ladder up the cliff face, and when all had reached the top, they kicked the ladder away, with the determination that if they couldn't attain enlightenment in their meditation, they would rather die trying. They meditated without eating and without moving for 5 days before the first of the monks was able to become an arahant, and floating in the air, he was able to fly down the mountain to go for alms round. Returning from alms round, he brought enough food for all the other monks too. However, the other monks were so resolute in their meditation they refused his food. On the 7th day, a second monk attained the mental state of non-returner. The 2 enlightened monks went for alms round, but the remaining 5 still refused to eat the food brought for them. Eventually, the remaining 5 died of physical exhaustion in their meditation. In terms of afterlife destinations, the arahant, of course, was not reborn anymore. The non-returner was reborn in the form Brahma realm, and the rest of the monks were reborn in heaven. After spending the requisite length of time in heaven, one of the 5 monks was reborn in the human realm as a merchant called Bāhiya. While trading, he was shipwrecked, and he was the only survivor. He was kept afloat by a plank and eventually made landfall at a port of Suparaka. Since he was naked, he tied a piece of bark around his body and sat in a place where passers-by could give him food. Some thought he was a holy man and paid respect to him. Some donated clothes for him to wear, but he refused them, fearing that he would command less respect if he gave up his bark clothing. Eventually, so many said that he was enlightened that he started to believe it himself. Consequently, he started to slip into wrong views. Because all he wore was bark clothing, the people gave him the epithet Dārucīriya, which means clad in fibers. At about this time, his former friend, who had been born in the Brahma realms, noticed Bāhiya's views going astray, and he felt that it was his duty to put him on the right path. The Brahma appeared to him at night and instructed, "Bāhiya, you are not an arahant yet, and what's more, you do not have the qualities that would lead you to arahantship." Faced with the truth, Bāhiya admitted, "Yes, it's true, I'm not an arahant. I now realize that I've made a great mistake. But is there anyone in this world now who can teach me the knowledge I need?" The Brahma advised him to go and seek help from the Buddha, who was at that time staying in Savatthi. Bāhiya, distressed by the enormity of his guilt, traveled all the way to Savatthi to see the Buddha. He met up with the Buddha when the Buddha was on alms round with many other monks and respectfully followed him. He pleaded with the Buddha to teach him the Dharma, but the Buddha replied that since they were on alms round, it was not yet an appropriate time for a religious discourse. Again and again, Bāhiya pleaded, "Venerable Sir, who can know what danger lies in wait for my life or yours? So please teach me the Dhamma right away." The Buddha knew that Bāhiya's mental faculties still lacked the potential to completely realize the Dharma, because Bāhiya was still overexcited from the long journey he had taken to meet the Buddha. The Buddha needed to calm Bāhiya down so that he could absorb the Dharma properly. Still, Bāhiya pleaded persistently. So instead of letting perfect be the enemy of the good, while standing at the roadside, the Buddha taught, "Bāhiya, when you see an object, just go through the motions of seeing it. In other words, look at it without getting caught up in its appearance. When you hear a sound, just go through the motions of hearing it. When you smell or taste or touch something, just go through the motions of tasting or touching it. When you think of anything, just go through the motions of cognizing it." Bāhiya did as he was told, and because of his deep concentration and the accumulated good karma of deeds in his past, he was able to attain full enlightenment on the spot. He asked permission from the Buddha to join the Sangha. The Buddha told him first to collect the robes and the bowl and the other monastic requisites that he was going to need. However, on his way to get them, he was gored to death by a mad cow. This is one of the only examples in the scriptures of a disciple attaining arahantship before ordination. But according to the Buddhist tradition, an unordained person cannot support such a high mental state, and so circumstances, in this case a mad cow, will conspire in one way or another to end that person's life within 7 days of their enlightenment. So now that we are a little more well-informed about what is meant by the dangers of sensuality and the logic of practicing the Brahma-Faring, let's see if we can upgrade the subtlety of our mind by settling ourselves down for 30 minutes of meditation, which today is the recent live recording of the 7 Bases of the Mind track. If at this time you would like to find a comfortable sitting position for yourself as you listen to my guidance. So I'd like to start by inviting everyone to find a comfortable position for yourself in meditation, with your right leg over your left leg, your right hand on your left hand, or if you're sitting on a chair, sitting fairly upright. And whoever you're sitting, the way to put your hands together is with the index finger of your right hand touching against the thumb of your left hand, and your hands turn palm upwards in your lap. But in practice, you can adopt any other looser variation of this position, which helps you to feel more comfortable when you're meditating. Pretty much anything except lying flat on the floor. The important thing is to feel that you are alert, while at the same time feeling relaxed. And your body position should be comfortable enough that your breathing and your circulation are unimpeded, and to minimize any possible aches or pains. Anything that might disturb the continuity of your attention. And to start with, we relax every muscle of our body. Relax every muscle, starting with the muscles of our forehead, our eyebrows and our eyelids. Taking special care to make sure that our eyes are only very gently closed. Being careful there's no pressure around our eyes. We never squeeze our eyes closed when meditating, but close our eyes only very gently. in the same way we might close our eyes to go to sleep. From there we relax the muscles of our face, our neck, both of our shoulders, both arms, hands and fingers, all the way down to the tips of our fingers. Relaxing them all completely before moving on to relax the muscles of our chest, our trunk, and our abdomen, both of our legs, all the way down to the tips of our toes, so that eventually all the way from the top of our head right the way down to the tips of our toes, there's no remaining part of our body with any sort of stress or tension anymore. If you do notice any stress or tension still remaining in your body, then try to relax it as far as you can, because the body that is completely relaxed will have the feeling as if it seems to melt away into the atmosphere around you, leaving us with no more worries about our body anymore, and allowing us to turn our attention instead to relaxing our state of mind. The way we relax the mind in preparation for meditation is by letting go temporarily of all the thoughts about the things in our lives, putting aside any worries or concerns, whether it be about work, friends, family, study, or any other thing. Instead, we keep our mind on the task in hand, on working with the mind, while at the same time filling our mind with a sense of happiness and joy, as if our whole mind were filled with tiny particles of that happiness and joy, filling the mind so completely that there's no room left in the mind for any other sort of thought. So we make our mind spacious, light in weight, radiant and refreshed. Because all these qualities are qualities of a mind which will slip easily into a sense of harmony and unity as we embark on the meditation ahead. And when we feel relaxed both in body and in mind, very gently and using no effort at all, we can cast our mind back to that imaginary picture mentioned a few moments ago. Some sort of bright object in the mind, perhaps something like a shining sun, a full moon, a twinkling star, or perhaps a sparkling diamond. Whatever you find the easiest to imagine. And bear in mind that it may be more of a feeling than a picture, almost as if you sense the presence of the object by how it feels, by its weight and texture, its shape and position. So either a visual object or an object that we detect by how it feels. And we imagine the object is floating a short distance in front of our face. Not worrying too much if the actual object is not very realistic, because that will develop over time. We imagine it effortlessly, while reducing the object down in size until it's only 2 or 3 millimeters in diameter, and floating in front of our nose, in front of the left nostril for ladies, in front of the right nostril for gentlemen, at a point known as the first base of the mind. And having reached this point, the object stops still, and we make the object as realistic as we can, while hearing the sound of that traditional mantra passing through the mind with words such as Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang, which are the Indic words for a bright object imagined in the proper way. But in fact, you can swap in any other mantra or affirmation which you feel happier with, just as a mechanism to help clear the mind of thoughts. And from there we move the bright object slowly upwards within the space of our nose, inside the left nostril for ladies, inside the right nostril for gentlemen, moving slowly upwards until it reaches a point inside the nose, just next to the corner of the eye. Here once again it stops still, and we make our object as realistic as we can, while hearing the sound of the mantra passing through the mind with the words Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang. And from there the object moves slowly backwards on eye level into the center of our head, until it comes to a place on our midline right between our two ears, a place known as the third base of the mind. Here once again the object stops still, and we make the object as realistic as we can, while at the same time hearing the sound of the mantra passing through the mind with the words Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang. And bear in mind that if you lose touch with the object at any point in this sequence, you can just come back to where you last saw it. There's no need for you to start all over again. And from the center of our head, the inner object continues on its journey now downwards, moving downwards on our midline until it comes to a point at the roof of our mouth or at our palate, a point known as the fourth base of the mind. And here once again the object stops still, and we make the object as realistic as we can, while at the same time hearing the sound of the mantra passing through the mind with the words Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang. And from the roof of our mouth, the object now continues on its journey downwards, moving downwards within the space of our throat until it comes to a point just above our Adam's apple, a point known as the fifth base of the mind. Here once again the object stops still, and we make the object as realistic as we can, while at the same time hearing the sound of the mantra passing through the mind with the words Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang. And from the center of our throat, the object now continues on its journey downwards into the space of our body. And at this point we might imagine that within ourselves is just a hollow shell. No organs or tissues, no muscles or bones, and our bright object is moving downwards on our midline, down through our chest, moving downwards through our torso, and eventually moving into the space of our abdomen. And on the level of our tummy button, if we were to imagine two thin lines, one running from our navel horizontally through our back, and a second line running from the right side to the left side. The point of intersection of these two imaginary lines is known as the sixth base of the mind. Our inner object moves downwards until it aligns with the intersection of the two lines. And once again it stops still as we make the object as realistic as we can, while hearing the sound of the mantra passing through the mind with the words Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang. And from that point at the level of our navel, the object now moves upwards the distance of just 2 finger breadths. So moving upwards this time from point number 6, we come to the final point in the sequence, which is known as the 7th base of the mind. And having reached this point, then we don't need to move our imaginary object anywhere else. We maintain our inner object at this point within ourselves, which also happens to be the center of our diaphragm, also happens to be our solar plexus, also happens to be the point where the breath turns around between the in-breath and the out-breath. So we maintain our inner object at this point now as continuously as we can, for as long as we can, at a point that is the true center of gravity of the body. All the while we hear the sound of the mantra, Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang, as if the source of the sound is the same place down at the 7th base of the mind, while always keeping our inner object as realistic as we can at the center of ourselves. If we find our attention wandering away onto other things, each time we just bring it back again to the seventh base of the mind as before. If the inner object disappears, we can conjure up a new one. But if it changes, we just follow it in its new form, lightly and gently. And as we continue with this exercise, what we'll find is that the inner object will become gradually clearer to us. Also, the feelings in the mind will become gradually clearer. At the same time, the number of thoughts in the mind will become gradually less. Less and less until our inner object comes to what's known as a standstill at the center of ourselves. In the beginning, we may find that the mind has a tendency to wander, sometimes wandering to the sounds around us, to the thoughts in our head, or to the sensations in our body. Especially if we're new to meditation, we shouldn't feel disappointed by this. But as soon as we realize, we just bring our mind back again to the inner object within us and the sound of the mantra, until eventually our awareness will build up a sense of familiarity with this point at the center of ourselves. And the mind will start to stay at the center of the body more or less by second nature. For now, we cultivate the mind on track at the center of ourselves by means of our inner object, and also by hearing the sound of the mantra in our mind over and over again for a few more moments now in silence until we come to the appropriate time. to keep our mind on track at the center of ourselves with a light and gentle attention, as continuously as we can, for as long as we can. Each time the mind wanders, as it inevitably will, we simply bring it back again until the mind starts to feel more at home at the center of ourselves. At the same time, in tandem with the visualization at the center of ourselves, we continue with the sound of the mantra coming up from the same place within ourselves over and over again, with the words Samma Araham, Samma Araham, Samma Araham, over and over again, until at a certain point in our meditation we may find that the sound of the mantra will die away of its own accord. And if there are no more thoughts popping up in the mind anymore, we'll be left with nothing but a pure, clear, shining mind at the center of the body. If there are no more thoughts at this point to irritate the mind, then there's no need for us to restart with the mantra anymore. We simply cultivate the mind in stillness at the center of the body. And as that mind enters upon a sense of stillness, then the feelings of happiness and purity and brightness will start to arise by themselves as an automatic byproduct of the process. So for now we cultivate our mind in silence, lightly and gently, for a few more moments, maintaining our mind at a standstill at the center of ourselves, each to our own meditation for a few more moments now in silence, until we come to the appropriate time. Sappa Putthanupavena, Sappa Dhammanupavena, Sappa Saṅkhanupavena, Sattha Soti Bhavantu Te. So if you'd like to come to the end of your meditation for today, you can gradually open your eyes again. If you feel at all uncomfortable, and slowly try changing to a more comfortable position before gently finishing your practice. So to return gently to our subject matter for today, we now examine the practicality of following the Brahma-Faring in everyday life. In fact, at its most basic level, many aspects of practicing the Brahma-Faring are things that we have already covered in previous blessings. However, by this stage in the blessings, you could say that we are practicing them with a more ambitious objective. There are 10 ways of practicing the Brahma-Faring, which I am dividing into low, medium, and high levels. Ways to practice the Brahma-Faring at the lowest level include generosity, service, and upholding the 5 precepts. Once your mind is already purified by austerity, the first thing you must do is to practice generosity or dana. Otherwise, possessions surplus to our needs will be chinks in our armor via which sensuality influences us to hoard or collect material things. An excess of possessions will get us entangled with others for the wrong reasons. In a similar way, we can practice the Brahma-Faring by giving time and effort to help others in need through service or vaya vacha. The occasion might be helping behind the scenes at an ordination ceremony or chipping in to repair a communal road. It might be something as simple as binning litter that has fallen on the side of the road. It might be stopping to help push someone's broken down car. In a word, it's using our selfless strength to help others. Those following the Brahma-Faring regard unused energy as dangerous because it can become essentially directed. So it's better to redirect our energies to more constructive ends. Finally, on the basic level of practicing the Brahma-Faring, you should strictly keep the 5 precepts. 5 precepts is the staple of almost every form of Dharma study. Where other virtues are like steps on the stairway of Buddhist practice, the 5 precepts can be compared to the handrail, which is always as long as the stairway itself, unlike the steps which each only extend for part of the way. So for any virtue, you can safely assume that it comes packaged with the 5 precepts, whether they are specifically mentioned or not. Particularly relevant to the Brahma-Faring is the third of the 5 precepts about not stepping out on one's spouse. Supposing we want to practice the Brahma-Faring but still have responsibilities to our family, then proper attention to the 5 precepts is our best strategy for practice. Even if we are not in a relationship but are still hesitant about severing the ties of sensuality, if we take our 5 precepts seriously, it will save us from the long-term troubles of interfering with married men or women. Taking the Brahma-Faring up a notch to the medium level includes spreading loving kindness, contentment with one's spouse, and complete abstention from sexual relations. Spreading loving kindness limitlessly, or apamanya, is the spreading of good wishes and forgiveness to all without exception, even if they are our enemies or have hurt us in the past. We might bring to mind the lyrics of Lennon and McCartney that said, "Life is very short and there's no time for fussing and fighting, my friend." At the same time, we need to be careful to distinguish between spreading loving kindness and indiscriminate promiscuity. Because in the right way, loving kindness will feel as if the whole of the world is like our own children, because we feel invested in all of them to be able to enjoy full happiness. This is completely different from wishing everyone in the world had a crush on you. The next medium-level way of practicing the Brahma-Faring is contentment with your own spouse, or Sattara Santusa. By this point in the blessings, any thought of marital infidelity should be long gone. So whether you still find your spouse attractive or find them less attractive than the neighbors should no longer be a question arising in your mind. If it is, then maybe you need to revise Blessing 13. Since you got married of your own free will, you can hardly blame anyone else. In the meantime, cultivating limitless loving kindness towards others without exception and contentment with your spouse will provide effective damage prevention for any wayward desires you may have. Step up from marital fidelity is abstention from sexual relations, or mithuna virati. This item generally applies to singles or those who have some religious commitment to celibacy. The mindset of such a person should be, I'm strong enough to be independent. I don't need to rely on a significant other to make me happy. I can be alone without being lonely. Reflecting on the 10 objections to sensuality I mentioned earlier will help sensual restraint seem more and more convincing to us as a pathway to liberation. There have been times in history when it would be considered incredible for a young person ever to agree to practice anything to do with the Brahma-Faring. However, all down history there have existed rare young people with a natural inclination towards practicing the Brahma-Faring at medium level or above. These days, though, it may be becoming more commonplace with identity categories like asexual or aromantic entering our vocabulary. In the words of a Gen Z student advisor, Cosima or Cosme Pellis at the University of Mary Washington, Virginia, abstinence is not just for people who are waiting for marriage. You can choose to be abstinent at any time, for any reason, and for any amount of time. It's all about what works for you and what you think is best for yourself. It can be a smart decision if you need some time to truly focus on yourself and school, or if you feel like your mental health is suffering due to a toxic partner, or if you need a break to clear your head and evaluate what you want from your life. So just as it is now, it used to be long ago in India, in fact 2,600 years ago. At that time, there was a young Brahmin from a wealthy family called Bipali. When he was young, he was very handsome, but was not interested in the married life. He was interested only in the study of the Dharma. His father worried that there would be no heir to the family fortune. According to the tradition of arranged marriage in those days, his father was so anxious to see his son married that he went personally to look for eligible brides. Eventually, the father found a beautiful young lady called Phra Kapilani, who was the daughter of a similarly wealthy family living in a distant town. It happened that Phra Kapilani, like Pipali, was repulsed by the whole subject of marriage. Nonetheless, this young debutante's parents were the same as Pipali's. They were afraid she would be left on the shelf. As soon as they heard that Pipali was in the market for marriage, they were quick to seal the betrothal. Little did the parents on both sides know that the bride and groom were already in correspondence with one another by letter. Both Pipali and Phra Kapilani had independently written to each other to plead that their parents cancel the marriage. The messengers bearing the letters met one another on the road between the two towns. Both were scared that if they brought unsavory news to their respective parents, they would get fired. So they both intercepted and rewrote the letters to say that both parties were looking forward to the marriage. So it came to pass that Pipali and Phra Kapilani could not avoid getting married, but because both had cultivated the Brahma-Faring for many lifetimes, they had no interest in sensual pleasures. Both had the latent ability to be arahants, and even though they were forced to sleep in the same bed, both of them felt completely indifferent. They would put a jasmine garland between them on the bed, and each of them would meditate in the sleeping position throughout the night, careful not to touch each other. Even after 10 years, when the parents on both sides of the family had passed away, they were still living their married life in the same way. Once the last of their parents had passed away, they gave away the family legacy to the poor. They both obtained the robes of an ascetic and renounced the home life. When they came to a fork in the road, Phra Kapilani said, "Now we are ascetics, to go around as a couple is no longer appropriate." Therefore she bade Pipali farewell, and both asked each other's forgiveness for any past trespasses, before Phra Kapilani took the left-hand fork and Pipali took the right. It said that through the power of the decision by such young people to go their separate ways, at that time there was an earth tremor in the vicinity. It said that what they were doing was something very difficult to do. The Buddha detected the earth tremor while he was meditating and looked for the reason. When he realized it was because of Pipali's renunciation, he went to meet him along the way, and in a single sermon could elevate Pipali to the level of an arahant in 7 days. Meanwhile, Phra Kapilani met with an enlightened nun who coached her to attain arahantship, again within 7 days. Ultimately, Pipali, under the ordained name of Mahā Kassapa, became a monk praised by the Buddha as unsurpassed in the practice of austerities. After the Buddha passed away, because he was one of the most senior monks in the community, he presided over the first council to collate the Buddhist scriptures, which is the illustration shown on this slide. Meanwhile, Phra Kapilani was praised by the Buddha for being the foremost nun for recollecting previous lifetimes. The moral of the story is that you can make your life simpler by foregoing the drama of romantic attachment. However, you may only realize the truth of this if you train yourself in meditation to the point that you attain inner brightness and can touch upon superior happiness. For those who are already committed to a partner, I'm not encouraging divorce, but at the same time, having a lot of children might still diminish your opportunities for spiritual practice. It might be better to practice contentment with what you already have. Nonetheless, the closer you can come to the higher levels of Brahma-Faring, the brighter the spiritual future you can expect, whatever your civil status. Taking the Brahma-Faring to its highest level includes striving, keeping the 8 precepts, following the Eightfold Path, and practicing all available teachings. The practice of persistence or striving, which are the usual translations of the Pali word viriya, means the fortitude to practice meditation continuously throughout your life. This fortitude refers to the 4 components met in the previous blessing, namely, not succumbing to unwholesomeness that you have never done before, giving up any unwholesomeness with which you are already involved, increasing your repertoire of good behaviors, and continuing with the good habits you already have. As for upholding the 8 precepts, or uposatha, for those who don't have a family to worry about, it might mean keeping their 8 precepts the whole of the time. For those in a relationship or with their own family, it might start by keeping the 8 precepts on the quarter moon days, so that you will need to get a copy of the Thai lunar calendar to know the date of the new moon, full moon, and the half moons. So you'll be starting to keep the 8 precepts approximately once a week. From there, you can gradually add the day before the quarter moon day and the day of the week on which your birthday falls, say Monday or Tuesday, and perhaps your partner's birthday too. In this way, assuming you and your partner weren't born on the same day of the week, you can gradually work up to keeping 8 precepts for 4 days a week. Another approach might be to keep the 8 precepts throughout the 3 months of the Buddhist Lent, which normally takes place from July through October. As for following the Eightfold Path or Ariyamaka, I won't go into further detail today because it's something I will return to in more detail in the next blessing. Lastly, practicing all available teachings or sasana Dhamma means following all the Buddhist teachings available to you, like the finishing touch to all the practices I've already mentioned. At all levels of the Brahma-Faring, the precepts are always present. At the low level, it's the 5 precepts, the mid-level is the 8 precepts, and at the highest level, it will be the 8 precepts or monastic precepts. To practice at this high level, you should warm up by practicing austerities, as mentioned in the previous blessing. Once you've mastered your austere practice, rather than going back to bed, you need to further your practice with daily acts of generosity, keeping the precepts at a level appropriate to your civil status, and training yourself in meditation as part of your daily routine. The effort to master every virtue you know about in this way is the true meaning of practicing the Brahma-Faring. Sometimes a practitioner's plans for Brahma-Faring at the highest level include sampling the ordination experience. In this connection, there are various possibilities that may suit folks from different walks of life. In the Thai Buddhist tradition, it used to be the case that temporary or permanent ordination was like a rite of passage for young men. If they couldn't manage it in their youth, then they would try to find time to ordain as a monk later in life. Usually at the age of 20, young men would ordain for 1 to 3 months. Some liked the experience so much that they didn't return to the lay life. Unfortunately, in contemporary Thailand, it has become a dying tradition, and in practice, many hesitate to take the opportunity to ordain, not only because they fail to see the importance, but often simply because they are unfamiliar with the requirements. In fact, the requirements are not that hard to understand. The age at ordination should be 15 to 20 for a novice who keeps the 10 precepts, and 20 upwards for those wishing to take full ordination as a monk who keeps the 227 precepts. Ordination as a monk is more rigorous, but this should not put teenagers off ordaining earlier in life, because novice ordination can be helpful, formative experience for those navigating the tumultuous years of adolescence. Furthermore, it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks, and for those ordaining late in life, it can be notoriously hard for them to adapt to unfamiliar aspects of monastic life. The ideal period of ordination would be the whole 3 months of a rainy season, or to ordain in the university summer vacation for 1 or 2 months. Alternatively, if you cannot take leave, any time when you can get time off work would be well spent at least once in one's life in pursuit of the monastic experience, ideally for at least a month. The amount a person can learn while ordained depends entirely on the quality of the training given by the temple or institute. With this in mind, a person should choose a place of ordination which emphasizes strictness in Dhamma education and monastic discipline. A good ordination provider will have a preceptor who takes direct responsibility for training the monks he ordains, giving an abundance of teachings and feedback to his students. This in contrast to places which abandon new monks to their own devices after the ordination. In some places, from the day of ordination to the day of disrobing, the ordinand doesn't receive any advice from their preceptor, which is a shame, as monasticism is more like an apprenticeship than treating the wearing of the robes as a lucky charm. Once ordained, a new monk should prioritize studying the Dharma and meditating, rather than chattering idly or looking for amusement. Even if there are opportunities to help with humanitarian or social work while ordained, a young monk should be careful not to become so involved with it that it takes time away from meditation and Dharma study. Seeing as it is hard to get full ordination and training in the United States for the interim, it's probably worth me recommending some alternatives for English-speaking males wishing to experience ordination. If Thailand is not too far away for you, you can find out more about the individualized programs of Phra Temple, Chiang Mai, via the Become a Monk tab on the website phrapairmeditation.org. Alternatively, take a look at the comparatively structured programs available in the International Monastery from the websites monklifeproject.com or imonastery.com. In practice, the two temples are right next door to each other, so you can probably choose when you get there. If Europe is more convenient for you, there is a 1-month ordination organized in local languages during July in Belgium each year, with details at eopdmc.eu. If you are not able to take male ordination for whatever reason, there are still plenty of opportunities to practice the Brahma-Faring. The first alternative for females is to ordain as a nun. Although it's possible to ordain as a female monastic in Mahayana traditions of Buddhism, and there are some initiatives to revive the tradition of female monasticism in the Theravada, more widely available in countries like Thailand is the possibility to ordain as a nun dressed in white who keeps the 8 or 10 precepts for a temporary period or permanently. Failing this, even without renouncing the world, a person may look for the opportunity to practice voluntary celibacy in their everyday life. Keeping 8 precepts generally wouldn't interfere with your day job. All you need to do is work around the items incompatible with the 6th, 7th, and 8th precepts. In a way, it gives extra energy to the mind, which will supercharge your meditation. For those approaching retirement, even within a marriage, another possibility is to renounce sexual activity once your eldest child leaves home, or for widows or widowers, to renounce sexual activities once your partner is gone. Instead of remarrying, you can remain faithful to your late spouse by keeping the 8 precepts instead. So to finish with today, we have time for a relevant story about levels of mental attainment and how it comes to those who practice in earnest, irrespective of their monastic status. In the time of the Buddha, there was a group of 60 monks who, having mastered Buddhist theory, took leave of the Buddha before going into the deep forest to put their knowledge into practice. In the forest, they came across an old woman who was the mother of the village headman. The old woman was very pleased to see such a large number of monks coming to practice in the neighborhood, so she undertook to provide all the monks' catering needs. One day she asked the monks, "Is it only possible to practice the Brahma-Faring as a monk, or can women and householders also practice?" The monks answered that it's also possible for householders to practice the Brahma-Faring, that it is accessible to anyone who wants to come to an end of defilements. The monk taught the lady all about meditation and keeping the 8 precepts, and all the other components of the Brahma-Faring. The lady trained herself strictly in accordance with what she'd been taught, and found she could make even quicker progress than the monks themselves, The reason she could make more progress was because she had built up such habits over the course of many lifetimes, and her hard life highlighted the value of such teachings. She was able to proceed through all 4 absorptions to reach the Dhammakaya at the level of the non-returner. Through the power of her meditation, she was able to read the minds of others. Consequently, she discovered that her own progress in meditation exceeded that of the 60 monks for whom she brought food. She did not hold this against the monks, however. She meditated further and found that the reason that they weren't making the expected progress was because they were suffering from indigestion as a result of unfamiliar food. Instead of meditating unhindered, their minds were always distracted by the thought of food they would have preferred. So from that day onwards, if the lady knew that there was a particular food that the monk was wishing for that day, she would provide the selfsame food for the next meal. The monks were constantly surprised by the fact that whatever food they happened to be interested in, it would always be the next meal on their plates. Before long, the monks were meditating better because they were no longer worrying about food, and in 7 days, 59 of the 60 could become arahants. The 59 returned to the temple where the Buddha was residing. The remaining monk who had not been so successful had not only come up against an obstacle in his meditation, he had also worked out that the lady was able to read his mind, so he was scared of her. He knew that if he should happen to think of anything wicked, he should be ashamed to death of that lady. This last monk abandoned his meditation and ran back to the Buddha, pleading for permission to continue his meditation somewhere else. The Buddha asked why, and the monk said, "That supporter is a mind reader. Suppose I think anything evil, what will she think of me?" The Buddha reasoned, to practice restraint even of your thoughts might just be exactly what you need, and he sent the monk back to where he had come from. But now that monk took such good care even of his thoughts that he was able to become an arahant in a relatively short time. As an arahant, he looked back into his past lives and found out that the same woman had helped him in many previous lifetimes too. So this session I have introduced to you Blessing 32 on practicing the Brahma-Faring. For my next live session online, which will, fingers crossed, be a week on Sunday morning, we'll continue with the 3rd blessing of the 9th subgroup, number 33, on Seeing the Four Noble Truths. For good measure, I'd like to remind viewers that you can email your questions about meditation or what you have heard in the lecture to the email address you can see spelled out in the slide, and I'll do my best to answer these on my next session. In the meantime, try to avoid recklessness or complacency as we continue to deal with the knock-on health and economic effects of the pandemic. Maintain a positive mood, speak only positive words, forgive others, extend good wishes to others, and meditate daily. Hopefully, as a result of today's session, you will feel better informed about what the Brahma-Faring entails and perhaps be inspired to practice for yourself at the level appropriate to your circumstances. So for today, this is me, Phra Nicholas Thanissaro, signing off for now. So long, folks, and stay safe.